But I want to get back to this, because I think the most blatant example of the left, the Democrats, the media, all the same, really. Not just of hypocrisy, that's really too kind of a term to use, of their absolute contempt for the American people and their deceit, is Ted Kennedy. Let me describe to those of you who don't know, and those of you who do, a reminder from thoughtcompany.com. Around midnight on the night of July 19, 1969, U.S. Senator Ted Kennedy had left a party, was driving his black Oldsmobile sedan when it went off a bridge and landed in Poocha Pond on Chappaquiddick Island, Massachusetts. Kennedy survived the accident, but his passenger, 28-year-old Mary Jo Kopechne, did not. Kennedy fled the scene and did not report the accident for nearly 10 hours. Although Ted Kennedy was subjected to a subsequent investigation and proceedings, he was not charged with causing Kopechne's death, a point that many contend was a direct result of Kennedy family connections. Edward Moore Kennedy, better known as Ted, graduated from the University of Virginia Law School in 1959. By 1969, he was married with 3 children, was lining himself up to become a presidential candidate, having been elected to the United States Senate in 1962. He had hoped to line himself up behind, obviously, his brothers, both of whom were assassinated. Been just over a year since the assassination of U.S. presidential candidate Robert F. Kennedy. So Ted Kennedy and his cousin, Joseph Gargan, planned a small reunion for a few select individuals who'd worked for RFK's campaign. The get-together was scheduled for Friday and Saturday, July 18 and 19, 1969, on the island of Chappaquiddick, located just the east of Martha's Vineyard, coinciding with the area's annual sailing regatta. By the way, Ted had a home on Martha's Vineyard. The small get-together was to be a cookout with barbecued steaks, hors d'oeuvres, and drinks held at a rented house called Lawrence Cottage. Kennedy arrived about 1 in the afternoon on July 18 and then raced in the regatta with his boat Victoria until about 6 p.m. After checking into his hotel, the Showertown Inn in Edgartown on the island of Martha's Vineyard, Kennedy changed his clothes, crossed the channel that separated the two islands via ferry, and arrived around 7:30 p.m. at the cottage on Chappaquiddick. Most of the other guys arrived by 8:30 p.m. for the party. Among those at the party were a group of 6 young women, known as the Boiler Room Girls. Now, let's just stop there. You're a married man. You're a senator. What are you doing with 6 young women at a party? The Boiler Room Girls. As their desks had been located in the mechanical room of the campaign building for RFK. These young women had bonded during their experience on the campaign and looked forward to reuniting at Chappaquiddick. One of these young women was 28-year-old Mary Jo Kopechne. Shortly after 11 p.m., Kennedy announced his intention to leave the party. His chauffeur, John Crimmins, was still finishing his dinner, so although it was extremely rare for Kennedy to drive himself, he asked Crimmins for the car keys, reportedly, so he could leave on his own. Kennedy claimed that Kopechne asked him to give her a ride back to her hotel when he mentioned he was leaving. Ted Kennedy and Mary Jo Kopechne got into Kennedy's car together. Kopechne told no one where she was going and left her pocketbook at the cottage. The exact details of what happened next are largely unknown. After the incident, Kennedy stated he thought he was heading toward the ferry. However, instead of turning left from the main road to head to the ferry, Kennedy had turned right, driving down the unpaved Dyke Road, which ended at a secluded beach. We all know what Kennedy was up to. We don't have to play games here. Along this road was the old Dyke Bridge, which did not contain a guardrail. Traveling approximately 20 miles per hour, Kennedy missed the slight turn to the left needed to make it safely onto and across the bridge. His 1967 Oldsmobile Delmont 88 went off the right side of the bridge and plunged into Poocha Pond, where it landed upside down in about 8 to 10 feet of water. Somehow Kennedy was able to free himself from the vehicle and swim to shore, where he claimed that he called out for Kopechne. Wow. Per his description of events, Kennedy then made several attempts to reach her in the vehicle, but soon exhausted himself. After resting, he walked back to the cottage, where he asked for help from Joseph Gargan and Paul Markham. Gargan and Markham returned to the scene with Kennedy and made additional attempts to rescue Kopechne. When they were unsuccessful, they took Kennedy to the ferry landing and left him there, assuming he was going back to Edgartown to report the accident. Gargan and Markham returned to the party and did not contact the authorities because they believed Kennedy was about to do so. I don't care. They go back to the party with the 28-year-old staffer in the Oldsmobile upside down in the water? Later testimony by Kennedy claims that instead of taking the ferry across the channel between the two islands, it had stopped working around midnight, he swam across. After eventually reaching the other side utterly exhausted, Kennedy walked to his hotel. He still did not report the accident. The next morning at 8 a.m., Kennedy met Gargan and Markham at his hotel and told them that he hadn't yet reported the accident because he somehow believed that when the sun came up and it was a new morning, that what had happened the night before would not have happened and did not happen. Even then, Kennedy did not go to the police. Instead, Kennedy returned to Chappaquiddick so that he could make a private call to an old friend, hoping to ask for advice. So he was trying to cover his ass and protect himself. Only then did Kennedy take the ferry back to Edgartown and report the accident to the police, doing so just after 10 a.m., nearly 10 hours after the accident, knowing Kopechne was still in the Oldsmobile. The police, however, already knew about the accident. Before Kennedy made his way to the police station, a fisherman had spotted the overturned car and contacted the authorities. At approximately 9 a.m., the diver brought Kopechne's body to the surface. And you see, ladies and gentlemen, there was an air pocket, as I've discussed before, in the Oldsmobile, in the back of the left or the right side of the automobile. And when they recovered Kopechne's body, they recovered her straining to breathe in that air pocket. And obviously she used up all the oxygen in the air pocket and suffocated. A horrendous death. What must have been going through that young girl's mind is unbelievable. She'd worked on Robert Kennedy's campaign. She was excited to go to this event, this reunion. She winds up dying in some hellhole because some lush decided his career was more important, so he was involved in a cover-up. Who the hell, what kind of human being waits more than 9 hours, almost 10 hours, to report to authorities that there's a young woman in a car that's underwater to try, please come as soon as you can to help save her life? What the hell? This is the line of the Senate. This is the line of the Senate. 1 week after the accident, Kennedy pleaded guilty to leaving the scene of an accident. He was sentenced to 2 months in prison, but the prosecution agreed to suspend the sentence upon the defense attorney's request based on Kennedy's age and reputation for community service. Kennedy never did a day, folks. He should have been charged with involuntary manslaughter, or even manslaughter. Leaving the scene of an accident. That evening, July 25, 1969, Ted Kennedy delivered a brief speech about a week later that was televised nationally by several television networks. He began by sharing his reasons for being in Martha's Vineyard and noted that the only reason his